Hello everyone. I'm making a Three Houses video after a very long time. Yeah, let's just leave it at that. But anyways, as promised in the last community tab vote, I wanted to assess whether or not this game mode actually did the job that it set out to do, and if so, how much people liked it. Cindered Shadows is a game mode that sparked a lot of criticism online from a vocal crowd of both content creators and players alike. And I'm gonna be upfront about this. I disagree with them. Yeah, that's right, Chaz. This is a call-out. Fight me. But in all seriousness, I feel that sometimes in our attempts to evaluate things, we default to critiquing them. Just to take this a little bit further in Arvis's Encyclopedia of the English Language, we see here that the word critique comes from criticism. And criticism is generally linked to things that one did bad. Except Arvis. Arvis never did anything bad. But in these attempts to criticize things, we often forget to give credit where credit is due, and praise to things that were done right. Unfortunately, this is the vast majority of what I've seen online regarding Cindered Shadows, and I think this is downright unfair. Let's be real, Cindered Shadows doesn't even come close to being a fantastic game mode. It, like everything and everyone in life, has its own flaws. Nevertheless, I do think that this DLC mode does the job that it set out to do quite well. Before I praise it, I do want to be fair, and so I'll go ahead and criticize the elements that I think were rather lackluster, or that I wish we would have had more expansion upon. The main suspect here, of course, is the story. While the story overall was a nice mini-arc that didn't meddle too much in the main storyline or alter any of the lore, I feel like what could have been seen as a positive is actually its main downfall. There are a lot of plot holes here, and many inconsistencies that are just downright sloppy. I'll point out a simple, albeit funny one at first. Hubert and Dudu are two of the most loyal retainers and subjects that Edelgard and Dimitri have. And if you're telling me that their two lords can vanish into an abyss for more than 24 hours without these two going ballistic and tearing down the monastery stone by stone in an attempt to find them, then I'm gonna call you out for some serious BS here. The story of the Abyss is just downright unrealistic. It vaguely occurs around Chapter 4 of the main game, and all these characters just vanish from the monastery, suddenly with no repercussions. We see maybe one time where they meet up with Rhea and Alois as they are integrated into the events that play out, but outside of that, there's no real further integration. Vice versa, it seems that our 4 Abyss units can join you in the main campaign, yet it doesn't really reference the Abyss adventures that you had with them very much, and seems almost as if the ending didn't happen. Outside of just these plot holes, the story doesn't deliver in terms of its depth, character development, or plot. At its core, the foundations laid for it are very promising, but having it devolve into Aelfric just becoming Orson 2.0, but he's also the ultimate simp, is a very weak motivation. Even weaker when we realize that he's fine with Citri staying with Geralt, and he just wanted her alive for his own disturbing peace of mind. I feel like Aelfric in general is a very big missed opportunity. And here's why. We learned that Aelfric was part of the Abyss up to 15 years ago, but that 5 years later, he suddenly changed and was obsessed with his mission of reviving Citri upon discovery of her body. You know what other characters were acting one way and then all of a sudden found to act differently? Those who slither in the dark. Monica, Cornelia, Tomas, Arundel were all figures who had a normal persona up until they were taken over by a member of Those Who Slither in the Dark and shifted their agendas and ideology. To take matters one step further, one of the most common requests in this game was for us to get more background on Those Who Slither in the Dark themselves, along with some more expansion on Edelgard's route and her relationship with them. Having Aelfric be a member of Those Who Slither in the Dark would have been the perfect opportunity to touch on this, without much modification of the mode itself. You can still have the same general storyline, but you'll have stronger motivations for stopping the villain, while having some more direct integration with the villains of the main game, and some character development for Edelgard and the other lords. Granted, having this directly integrate in a pre-time skip manner is probably difficult for keeping the actual main plot consistent in and of itself, but if you have it written in a way where only Edelgard or Byleth understand the developments, then you can probably maintain the integrity of the main story, much like how Edelgard knows who the Death Knight is the entire time, but the player does not. Aside from that, those are my major qualms with the story, which I felt was average to below average overall in terms of the quality it presents us. The characters themselves were pretty okay, they were all generally likable and fun to be around, and I don't really have any complaints there. But like I said in my opening statement, I don't think that this was the purpose with which Cindered Shadows was designed. And for me to go out and evaluate it on this would just be unfair. Cindered Shadows is a gameplay-focused DLC. It may not have the map design that people had been wishing for, but it's important for us to recognize it for what it is. The mode centers around rather limited levels of micromanagement and resources when compared to the main game. You're not spending obnoxious amounts of time running around teaching your students, doing mini-quests or auxiliary battles, or even finding lost items. But in return, you have a smaller, more compact home base that is actually visited less times than there are chapters. And overall, it feels like a more linear and free-flowing gameplay experience. In addition to that, you also don't have the unit customizability that the main game boasts. Usually, I'd be all for more customizability on units, but I feel like all I ended up doing with it was making everyone a Wyvern Lord, giving them stride, and blitzing the game into oblivion. And that just wasn't really that much fun. In this mode, your units are only granted access to a few canon classes. We're given preset gambits, and no positional skills. This is the equivalent of them giving you a pre-made set of tools to solve a puzzle that you are presented with. And the mode delivers on this. Almost every single chapter has a very specific problem for you to work your way through in order to reach the final objective. And in the cast of characters you were given, lie the solution to all those problems. I'll break this down chapter by chapter because I think it's important to recognize the small details that the gameplay is hitting you with, as well as the fact that most of the reviews I've seen are an incessant wave of, "These are just glorified route maps." And honestly, if we're gonna say that, might as well label every Fire Emblem game ever made the same way. In general, Chapter 1s are usually not anything completely special. It's an introduction with a couple of interesting mechanics presented to you that revolve around threshold triggers in this case. While not a very unique feature, or anything too special, this is your gimmick for the map. Enemy spawns, and even moving from one area to another, are associated with you walking past a certain invisible line that causes these events to take place. They're simple to deal with, but like I said, as a start, having a small feature like this take place is more than okay as you get a feel for the hand that you've been dealt in terms of your party members. In Chapter 2, it plays out based on two different mechanics. The first one that you see is a separation of your team into two different parts, which is nothing strange to Fire Emblem. We've seen this before. The second mechanic is the approach of enemies in waves. There are 3 different waves that spawn after you clear all available enemies on the map, and they spawn in a rather predictable counterclockwise manner. However, there are a lot of enemies that come in, and if you clear the waves too quickly, it is possible that you may get caught off guard or get overwhelmed if your units are not in ideal positions. If you are playing this chapter blind, you don't know where they're coming from, but ultimately you can probably make a judgment call. It would have been better had they not just made it a counterclockwise spawn chain, but it could have been worse. Chapter 3. This is where a lot of people start to hate Cindered Shadows. Chapter 3 has one very simple target. You need to kill the mini-boss at the start, and use the key it drops on one of 3 possible points at the bottom of the map. The twist is, however, that you get punished if it's the wrong one, and these punishments can range from additional enemy reinforcements to decreased movement and other statuses. However, this chapter draws a lot of criticism from being a very long rectangular map with lots of tanky enemies that make it feel like a slog. You don't have warp or stride to speed things up, and to make matters worse, those enemy robot dolls that have high defense start spawning as reinforcements at the back of the map where you need to go, further increasing the time taken to clear it. Yeah, this map kinda blows. The gimmick, for what it is, isn't a bad idea, and we've seen RNG key locations used in other games before, but it definitely could have been handled in a better way. Chapter 4 is beautiful. Any Thracia fans in the house? This one is somewhat reminiscent of the Manster escape maps in that game. Simply put, everyone's gotta escape together at the end of the map. The map design here isn't linear, and there are 2 thresholds that cause both enemies to spawn and despawn when you cross them. Oh, and did I say there's also a turn limit to make sure that you don't just dilly-dally your way through an escape map? And if that wasn't enough, there's a big-ass invisible Gundam with a spear and lethality chasing you down, as if it's the only mission it has to fulfill before it can go to the afterlife. So yeah, I like this. The map gives you a clear objective. It's not a kill every last one of them map, and it forces you to make progress, move quickly, and think about the actions you're committing to, lest you find yourself in a bad situation and lose a unit. The one thing I didn't like, however, was how every time you crossed the final threshold, enemy units would spawn at the top. That felt a bit lazy. You pulled out all the stops, you made a fantastic map, and at the end of the line it's just a mass dump of enemies. This is where traps could have been laid in a seemingly unassuming calm area. You know, some enemy spawns are fine, but maybe make some warp tiles, spice things up a bit. Come on, intelligent systems, you got this. But yeah, Chapter 4 was a lot of fun. But of course, in regular fashion, immediately after the best map in the mode, Chapter 5 comes in and wins the award for potentially the worst Fire Emblem map I've ever seen. Okay, maybe not that bad, but still. This is literally just a route map, where you're surrounded, and there's enemy monsters fighting enemy humans. That's it. Can I move on now? I think I can. Chapter 6 has to be the best example of, we gave you the tools, now solve the puzzle. There's a ton of long-range magic at play here, and to make matters worse, your Ashen Wolves units are taking damage over time and isolated individually away from the rest of your army. Whatever shall you do if RNG is unkind? Well, did you check your battalions for retribution? All you have to do is utilize it, and start moving your army up the middle to rescue the Ashen Wolves one by one before obliterating the boss. Outside of figuring out the initial gimmick, it's a straightforward map. But that's the message I want to drive home with these. They're all a puzzle that can be solved, and the fun is in solving that puzzle with what limited resources you have at hand. And last but not least, the final map. This isn't anything special. The boss has a really nice gimmick where he uses his special attack and warps everyone, including himself, randomly across the map. The only problem is, he's totally stunned for a turn after he uses it, and he can't even counterattack. This would have been really interesting if he didn't stun himself, but instead it just makes him one giant punching bag and totally trivializes the fight. The clones are interesting, but not that threatening, and the boss fight itself isn't exactly the most difficult if you use your battalions properly to break the shields. So, as you can see, they did try and implement a gimmick into each map that is different than what you would normally see. Ultimately though, if you really want to zoom out and look at it from a broad perspective, you won't appreciate the little details. But for what it's worth, I thought this brought a fresh experience to the table that definitely felt different to anything I've played in the main game. Whether or not it's worth your money isn't my decision to make, but I gotta say I had a lot of fun playing it, and it wasn't a huge time sink either. In all honesty, there are a few things regarding map design that I was going to go deeper on, but I decided to make that its own video. And this is getting long enough already as is. I hope you guys are all staying safe indoors during this difficult time around the world. Make sure you take care of yourselves first and foremost, both mentally and physically, and embrace the people around you. We're all going through a hard time, so this is where we all have to stick together, help each other out, and we'll all get through this stronger than we were before, hopefully. And with that being said, I have some fun plans for video ideas that I promise to try and get out to you quicker than what my upload rate has been lately, and one of them is actually a huge collab with some other Fire Emblem YouTubers that was a lot of fun to do, so stay tuned and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace!